This tweet from Pack himself, after participating in the latest YCS in Indianapolis, sparked a lot of discussion about what is a good format and is it bad to have such high diversity in a format like we are in today. This is what I want to discuss in today's video with you guys. Leave your comments below and your thoughts. As always, like the video, subscribe after you watch. And I think that what Pack has tried to say here was that it is very, very hard to prepare for an event, or to prepare your deck, rather, for an event when you have such high variance in the top tables or in the general tables at a YCS. When you have so many different decks that are viable, your side deck, which is only limited to 15 cards, and also your flex spots in the main deck are just not enough to deal with all the matchups. And he also says 1,000 different decks with people putting in random non-engine in and some with no non-engine at all, unplayable going second, probably going to work behind the booth for YCS Richmond, which is of course not true because Pack is a really accomplished player. But what he's trying to say here is that, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video just a moment ago, it is very hard to prepare your deck for every possible matchup. So in this video, what I want to do is try to break down the current meta and look at how maybe you can prepare for an event like that in this meta, and how you can make sure your deck is covered when it comes to the 1,000 different matchups. And we'll look at that in a second because there were a lot of different matchups you could encounter. Before all that, don't forget my new Chainlink TCG Field Center exclusively with them. 100 limited copies, almost sold out. Get your serialized copy today. And of course, check out my sponsors' links in the description below. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter, where I post all of my random thoughts and of course news regarding my sponsors, new products, new merch, new cards, pre-sales, everything like that. So without further ado, YCS Indianapolis in Indiana, USA 2023, October 21st to 22nd. This amazing graph by Dual Chronicles, shout out to them, check them out, they're relatively new, super resourceful and useful website. They posted the breakdown of the top 32 in Indy. A lot of Rescue Ace with Sinful Spoils. Pearly, second most represented in Top Cut, and then Tier Elements, Vanadium, Sprite, Unchained, and 21% other. Let's look at the breakdown here. So we have, a lot of Sinful Spoils, but we also have Tier Elements, Exosister, Vanadium, Horus Bestial, Rickus and Avalon, Labyrinth, Fluendereeze, Adventure Sprite, Runic, Vanquish Soul, another Pearly, Tri-Brigade, Sprite, and Unchained. And that is aside of the Sinful Spoils Rescue Ace deck and of course Pearly, that were the two most topping decks. This actually means that you will encounter a lot of matchups. So what we're gonna try to do in this video, following from now on, is try to break down the top 4 decks that actually made it into this event. Try to break down the 4 strongest decks and what you can actually do to prepare against them. Then we're going to compare what is actually in common when you're preparing for those kind of decks, and try to maybe give you a picture of what your side deck could actually look like for an event like this. So let's start with the obvious. You have Rescue Ace as the top deck following this event. I don't think there's any discussion about that. Ash Blossom, Imperm, and Veiler are specifically strong against. We saw those hand traps being main deck. I think it hits the right interactions within the deck. Veiler and Imperm hit the Turbulence, and then you have Ash Blossom to deal with the emergency. Then you have some Silver Bullets, which are specific to the matchup. Now, you don't necessarily want to side or main Silver Bullets for it. You want to make sure that your Silver Bullets, quote unquote, catch more matchups than just that specific matchup. But if we're talking about things like Denko Sekka that prevents your opponent from setting or flipping up the cards they have set, Artifact Lancia, which prevents them after they've used Emergency to actually get to Turbulence because they will not be able to special summon it by banishing cards, and even Dimension Shifter, of course, if your deck can run it, it definitely makes sense. But also when you're talking about your side deck, things like Lightning Storm, Hot Priest, Feather Duster, Evenly Matched are also rather generic, that can hit a lot of different decks, either the back row or the monsters with Lightning Storm, that could be used. Again, now with the Sinful Spoils engine, there is more access to things like Warlord, Savage Dragon, Baron, but overall, I think that these are kind of like mainstay cards that are very staple, very common, so keep them in mind. as we move forward and talk about the other decks. And of course, we have a side option with Fantastical Dragon Phantasme, which is not bad against a lot of decks, things like Unchained and of course Rescue Ace, all targeting. Now, when they go into SPL Knight or any other Link monster, Phantasme will protect you from a targeting effect, so keep that in mind. Now, the second deck I want to talk about is Pearly. Again, if we're talking about Ash Imperm Veiler, those cards work relatively well against a deck like Pearly. Ash can hit things like Prosperity, of course, My Friend Pearly, but most importantly, Imperm and Veiler can prevent them from ranking up. It is a deck that dealing with it with board breakers is much more efficient than dealing with it with hand traps, right? So when you're talking about Triple Tactics Talent, Thrust, Herald of the Abyss, Book of Eclipse, Spellbound, stuff like that, those will be much more effective against Pearly, but way less effective against things like, for example, Unchained or maybe Tearlaments. We have two other top decks that require a whole other different approach. We have Unchained and we have Tearlament. So Unchained is a deck that doesn't lose to hand traps at all. So we talked about Ash Imperm Veiler. That kind of goes out the window, to be honest. Those interactions not really work. But also, board breakers aren't really good because they end on a relatively small board. You don't want to destroy their cards, so evenly matched is fine, but they will still be able to keep some interactions on the board from the hand, from the graveyard. It's a bit too little too late when it comes to like wiping their board. You're going to get a lot of the effects in the way. The Unchained board is like one back row, one Xyz, one Link. They all require different kind of treatments to deal with them, which makes it, of course, a lot harder to break their board. Things like Bestials, DD Crows are good. Dimension Shifter is solid against Unchained, even though we saw some Unchained player actually playing that in the deck because it's so good against the other decks. But also Nibiru, things like Nibiru. Now, Tearlaments is the last top deck I want to talk about, and it is very unique because Ash Imperm Veiler could do a lot. Droll and Nibiru could do a lot. Board breakers don't really work because they end on like interruptions. It's similar to Unchained in a lot of ways because there's interruptions from Field Spell, Shufflers, Links, Fusions, Xyz. You have things like Dweller, and of course you have very strong back row. So again, with Tearlaments, you want to take a more proactive approach, which is playing Bestials, DD Crow, Shifter, possibly, maybe Droll even, which is sometimes good against Tearlaments. But it doesn't stop there because, as you saw, there were 11 other decks in Top Gun. 11. You have Mannadium, Floowandereeze, Labyrinth, Sprite, Bestial. I want to summarize how I think you could try to prepare a few pointers to help you kind of figure out how to approach deck building when there is a very, very varied and wide format as we have it now. First thing is understanding your matchups. You need to figure out which decks your deck can just naturally beat and which decks you need help against. If you play a deck like Pearly, for example, with the Stray Pearly Street field spell that prevents you from targeting, maybe going second, and Pearly is a really good deck and going second anyway, maybe you don't need a lot of specific hate for Rescue Ace. The second thing is that, as we saw, Ash Imperm Veiler are probably very good main deck staples right now, alongside Droll and Lockbird, which is, again, you need to be playing this card in your side deck 100%, and Nibiru. They provide really quality interactions against a lot of the decks. So I think you need to be playing a deck that allows you to play some non-engine cards in your deck, maybe put some of those hand traps in, and dedicate cards in the side for those big blowout cards, which are really important. And then, speaking of blowout cards, focus on high impact cards in the side deck. You don't necessarily, we saw that a lot in lists when it comes to Indie. People siding in Ash Imperm. I don't necessarily love that. I think when it comes to Tearlaments, there's no room for non-engine in the main, so sometimes they will put those silver bullet cards against some decks, like Imperm on the Turbulence, Ash on the Branded Fusion, stuff like that. But overall, you want to get, since you have so little amount of resource from the side deck, you want to get as much as possible from your side deck. You want to get every interaction to be like game-breaking, i.e. Droll against Mannadium, Nibiru against Unchained, stuff like that. I think a proposed solution could be going with the side deck of 2 Bestial Druid's Worm, 1 Bestial Magnamut to cover those Tearlaments, Unchained, Dragon Link matchups. Then you have 2 Lightning Storm and 1 Harpy's Feather Duster to cover those back row matches, Trap decks, Labyrinth, Rescue Ace, and then 3 Droll, 3 Nibiru. Those combo decks still exist if you don't want to lose automatically against something like Rika or Manetium. You have to be playing those cards. And then 3 flag spots. It could be evenly to deal better with Rescue Ace, but then it could be some going first cards that only your deck can run. For example, Gozen Match if you're playing Marincess or something like that. There can be only 1 if you're playing something like Vanquish Soul. Something that secures the win when you're going first. Leave your thoughts on the format, on the video, on my pointers down below in the comments. Like the video, subscribe if you want to support the channel even further. You can check out my links to my sponsors and support me. Pick up some merch, pick up the Field Center before it goes away. And also you can join as a member to my channel if you want to really support and get some awesome rewards. We are working on new emojis for members. That's going to be really, really awesome. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.